Hi everyone! Today, we explore how to apply for a PhD in the United States. What to do, what to avoid, and how to maximize your chances. This is my discussion with Darren Lipomi, professor at the University of Rochester. Darren mentored over 100 undergraduate students over 14 years. 11 of his mentees were admitted to a PhD program at Stanford, and 1,000 others became PhD students in other schools. Previously, he spent 12 years as a faculty at the University of California in San Diego, where he also served as Associate Dean for Students and Director of Graduate Admission. This episode is not sponsored. It's from me for free. So I hope it helps you take the next step. Please enjoy. There are a lot of things that go into the application package for a PhD. Why cannot students be judged just based on their CVs?
An admissions committee uses a number of different criteria in order to make a decision. And if you were to go on Twitter maybe 5 years ago, you could see every reason in the world to discount this or that part of the application package. For example, the GRE is biased toward a certain type of individual or biased against a certain type of individual. The GPA is not the whole story. The letters of reference are biased in a sense that it rewards people who have had research experience and who are outgoing and make connections to faculty members. The diversity statement, to the extent that it was required back then, it wasn't ubiquitous and certainly isn't now. People just say what they think the admissions committee wants to hear. And the CV is one element. It has a distillation of the transcript on it. It has a distillation of the research experience, the posters and papers if a student has had a paper. And if there was one piece of the application package that I would want to go by, it would just be the CV.
Mm-hmm. Would it be the statement of purpose?
The statement of purpose is pretty easy to game, particularly if you are someone who's inclined to seek a lot of help from resources on the internet, and you come up with a statement of purpose that hits all the right notes. It's quite easy to manipulate somebody psychologically. But why would you not just use the CV? Well, the application process is one of de-risking. And if I, as a PI, am going to spend every weekend for a month and every evening for a month to write one proposal for $300,000, say from the NSF or NIH, and that proposal has a 15% chance of getting accepted, and more importantly, an 85% chance of getting rejected. I have this one gold nugget that I put my blood, sweat, and tears into. I need to know about this candidate that I'm going to bring on and have a relationship with in the lab, for an academic relationship, obviously, for 5-6 years. And I want that process to be as de-risked as possible. And if I just look at the CV and say this person has 5 papers, but they were an absolute terror in the lab, they bullied people, they didn't come in that much, maybe they just, learned how to operate a piece of equipment but didn't have any intellectual contribution, maybe that could inflate their publication record, but it would be reflected potentially in the 3 letters of recommendation. So it's a check and balance. It's a diversification and a de-risking strategy. And that's why you can't go just based on the CV. But if I had to choose one document to make a poor decision, but the best decision possible, the one piece of evidence that I would want is the CV and not necessarily the other items if you're going to insist that I choose only one.
That's interesting. Because a lot of PIs choose recommendation letters, probably at the postdoc level, but still.
Can I go back to your statement about the many faculty would choose the letters of recommendation? So at the graduate student level, you need to know what the GPA is. I mean, the GPA is not everything, and there's immense degrees of grade inflation at this university versus this university, and it's all differential, right? You need to know what courses the students have taken, and you don't want the letters of recommendation to just go through the litany of all the courses. If I'm doing organic chemistry and a student had a C in organic chemistry, but had A's in every other course, and their GPA is thus high because it averaged out, then I'm not going to want that student. And the letter of recommendation might not reflect that particular level of granular detail. And neither is the CV. And that's why we ask for lots of different evidence as to the ability of this student to have success in a graduate program.
So today, with all the AI capabilities, and especially that simplifies the application process for a lot of international students, how do you see the statement of purpose? What is the purpose of the statement of purpose today? And to what extent do students have to invest into it today? Or the committee does not really look very careful at it because they know that there could be biases and there could be things that come from just exceptional ability to use AI.
When you say biases, do you mean on the part of the committee or on the part of the applicant? So maybe the applicant might be biased toward a belief that the committee wants to see a particular thing, so they have to put that in there. For example,
that's what I mean. Exactly.
They call it in the admissions business trauma porn, for example, where there is a belief that a student has to, in gory detail, tell a story about how everything bad that's ever happened to them has to go in the statement of purpose to trigger a sympathetic response on behalf of the admissions committee, and therefore give them an advantage. And whether or not that's a real effect, it may be, it may have evolved over time, but that can be a real bias in priors on the part of the applicant. On the part of the committee for PhD applicants, the committee can mean a lot of different things. I don't want to get too far out of scope of the question that you asked, but a committee could be one person or 5 people or the entire department, depending on what kind of department you're looking at. Now, to answer the question about how do I feel about statements of purpose and what are some of the issues surrounding statements of purpose, statements of purpose are much easier to write now, and especially to clean up language and grammar that may not be very precise, especially for international students who may not be speaking English as a first language. And AI tools are wonderful for help with that. I mean, you don't want to give away points by making a bunch of subject verb object errors, right? You don't want a lot of dangling participles and run-on sentences and things like that. You want coherence in your writing. And yeah, if you're going to use ChatGPT to do that, by all means. It is very easy to detect when ChatGPT or another tool has been used exclusively without much contact with the purported writer of the document. And there are obvious things like words like delve and the excessive use of M dashes and all the things that make, memes on X and Blue Sky. But there are more significant telltale signs of something that's been written by an LLM, like the excessive use of superlatives, the excessive balloonification of somebody's the fact that this or that characteristic highlights or underscores their ability to thrive in a rigorous graduate
Right.
program, and mostly the abstraction of facts, the elimination of facts about the student's application in favor of this kind of fluff, shoveling BS kind of thing. And that's the real telltale sign. But if you take an LLM and you just fill it with facts about everything you did, everything that led to your interest in science, that speaks to your ability to be creative and reliable in the lab. Those are the things that ChatGPT is not going to know unless you tell it. And that shows you that there was some effort that went into constructing that statement of purpose. And once you have a logical argument that's specific to that person, that's full of real characteristics about the person, not just superlatives, real accomplishments, placed into a narrative that led them to say, I believe I'll have success in this field, and this is why I'm so passionate about it. Those things are really hard to fake. And there can be ChatGPT involvement in the construction of that kind of statement of purpose in the form of grammar checking and coherence and so forth. And that's all fine. But it's a meaningful document in that case.
So what do you think that a statement of purpose should highlight in the first place? So when a committee sees an excellent statement of purpose, what does it look like?
When I ran graduate admissions for UC San Diego Department of Chemical and Nanoengineering, and I did that for 3 years, we had on average 400 applicants per year to the PhD program. And I'm at a campus now, University of Rochester, where the chemistry department has 900 applicants per year in chemistry. So what are you looking for? The statement of purpose and the whole application package in total are a psychology experiment. In principle, you can, as an applicant, put down a string of words and documents that either will or will not get you accepted. There is, in principle, some set of words that's going to get you an acceptance letter. And that is, 5% of applicants or something if you've got 900 applicants. And the trick is, of course, those words, it has to be correct, right? You can't lie in your application, but you can choose to highlight things in a way that will maximize your success. Okay, I didn't say anything that offends the intuition there, but the statement of purpose, along with the rest of the application package, the statement of purpose in particular is your opportunity to be unique and to explain what your superpower is and why you are curious and reliable, and what is the evidence for your curiosity and reliability and ability to work hard, and what you want to do with it afterwards. What do you want to do with your degree? And those that stick out to me are those that are a coherent and, dare I say, exciting narrative about why we want to invest in this person and why our faculty, who as a department chair right now, I am trying to support, I'm trying to bring on the students who are going to contribute to the research enterprise in each one of the labs. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by bringing in students who have shown evidence of creativity, reliability, hard work with an idea. It can change, but at least an idea of what types of things they may want to do with their degree afterwards.
So it's more of a psychological profiling that you can ideally make from that statement of purpose. So you can see if the person will be persistent enough, will be curious enough, and will be ready to commit over this long PhD time. Of course,
that
seeking success at the end.
I've never thought about the word psychological profiling. My invocation of the word psychology was really more on the part of the applicants manipulating the psychology of the admissions
Oh,
committee.
no.
But I guess yeah. But I see your point. Yeah, to put a finer point on it, one can imagine the characteristics of those 95% of statements of purpose that do not really make a splash. Maybe those students get in anyway because they have high GPA and, 5 papers or something. But what are some of the characteristics of unsuccessful or unmemorable statements of purpose? They all start with, I used to play with Legos as a kid, and I was always fascinated by nature, and I did really well in school, and I want to do more school, and University of Rochester is awesome, which it is, and therefore I want to go there, and I want to work with this, and this person because I read them off the website, but there's no more detail than that.
And when it comes to the research proposal or the research interest that you have to also submit in some schools, what is the purpose for that? Because many students, maybe in chemical engineering, it's less often the case, but in many departments, many bachelor students are not involved in research. So whatever they can propose will likely not be what they will be doing during PhD. So if a student is a bit puzzled by the purpose of this research proposal, what would you say then it should be?
There is a program in the US called the Graduate Research Fellowship Program of the National Science Foundation. And one of the key components of that application is the research proposal. And in my view, and these are actually the directions given by the program managers to the reviewers and the committees, is that the student is not expected to do the research that they propose. What they're looking for is command of the scientific method. Can they find a hypothesis? Can they formulate a hypothesis based on observations? Do they know how to test them? Do they know what controls look like? Do they know have they done the bare minimum of research on how different characterization techniques or measurement techniques or computational techniques can provide light on the hypothesis, and can that and how, if the results come out this way or another, does that either support or falsify the hypothesis? And I mean hypothesis broadly. A hypothesis could be a device that exploits a new physical effect. It could be a biomaterial. I'll put that under the category of device. It could be a drug delivery nanoparticle. It could be an algorithm based on LLMs for discovering a new way that proteins fold, or that a catalyst is developed. And so it's an analytical writing exercise more so than just, I want to do this because it's potentially impactful and it's similar to stuff that I've done in the past.
Right. So then it doesn't matter how excellent the proposal itself, the idea itself is. So it's not like you're looking for the students who can propose the most implementable and the most impactful ideas, but it's more about what is the how much the student is aware about the methods and the methodologies that should go with research.
In general, that's true. Even in the GRFP process, the novelty of the idea is not a primary scoring criterion. However, if you propose, I'm going to go to the Galapagos Islands and measure the beak depths of finches because I want to pose the theory of evolution by natural selection, they're going to say no, because that was done along 150 years ago. So within reason, right? You want to have a research proposal that is timely, that is eye-catching, and that hasn't obviously been done already. The people reading your applications in either a fellowship application or a graduate admissions committee are usually not going to be an expert in the thing that you write your research proposal on, but they're still a professor and they go to talks outside their field, and they're the people that remember their non-disciplinary science courses in in college and grad school, right? So there is some awareness.
So now moving on to the recommendation letters, who should write them? How do you pick the right references for yourself as an undergrad? What is the best approach? What would you recommend then?
You want to choose 3 people who will write you the longest recommendation letters possible. And those are people who know you really well. And it takes a long time to write a long letter. And that is a sign of investment and care on the part of a really busy person. If it takes them a 6-hour plane ride, which is how I used to write letters of recommendation when I was flying 100,000 miles a year, I would do them on planes because at the time you didn't have internet. So you were just writing. If someone is willing to put in that time and it's a very busy person and they've used half-inch margins and taken up all 2 pages and single-spaced 11-point font, that is a good letter, provided it's actually talking about actual stuff that you did and character qualities and speaking to your abilities, your future abilities as a colleague in a lab and a creative individual. If it's just all, this person's the best and they just repeat those kinds of things for 2 pages, of course, you don't want that. But you want somebody who's going to show the committee that they invested their time. Are those recommendation letters all going to get read back to front? Nope. But people will see the care. They'll read them. They'll skim them quickly, and certain items will catch their eye. They'll be able to tell if they're being BS'd. And the most worthless kind of letter is the one that's short and just said, this person got an A in my class. Refer to someone else's letter about what they actually did.
Okay, so as a student, then how would you approach this search for references? Because you don't know in advance who is able to write this long recommendation letter. You don't have that feedback, right?
I think you can make a pretty good guess as to who is going to go to bat for you. Your research supervisor is probably a good bet. If you worked with a postdoc or senior scientist in the lab, it's totally okay to ask a letter from them too. The only problem with that is that if you're in a big lab, the PI is probably going to ask that person to draft the letter to begin with. Instructors that you had more than one course with, instructors that you went to the office hours of and that know you, teaching track faculty members as opposed to research track faculty members can often write really compelling letters. They're often more invested in the outcomes of their undergrad than, say, not the research supervisor, but maybe a famous person or a well-known person on your campus that you had a collaboration with. So maybe there's a project that's like me and someone really famous at the med school or something, and you say, I'm going to get the letter from Darren, and then I'm going to get the letter from this other person, but the other person barely knows you and you want their letter because they have a famous name. That's probably not the best strategy. So I think you can not predict, but you can make reasonable estimates as to the probability that they're going to spend a good amount of effort on your letter.
So basically look for someone who can write a lot of substance
Yes,
in the latter,
that's
right?
somebody who knows you well and someone who's invested in your success. And that investment will come through simply because it took them a lot of effort to write that letter. Can I say one more? I want to say one more thing about the letters. I write really long letters. I've had 20 students get into top 10 departments. I've had 11 students get into Stanford alone. Um, I have quite a good track record of getting my own students, of supporting my own students in the form of letters to get fellowships and so on. We've had almost 10 GRFP winners in the lab, or that have gone to other, if you count students who have gone to other places and gotten the GRFP, it's more like 15. So this is a real thing. This is a real thing. Don't discount instructors that have taught more than one course, and don't just go for the name. Go for somebody who really knows you.
GRE and TOEFL. So are they still a thing? I remember during my time when I was applying for a PhD in the US, it was a big thing, but I see that recently there is a shift away from assessing students based on GRE and TOEFL. So what's your experience?
Yeah, so TOEFL, test of English as a foreign language, is still used for pretty much every non-English, official English speaking country. Usually those elements are, there's often a threshold that a particular department or program uses, where if the number is below a certain score, then that person may not even make it in front of the faculty search committee. It depends on the school. I think for many people, for many PIs who are interested in taking a student who speaks English as a second language, may also want to talk to the applicant on Zoom, just to make sure that the TOEFL is an accurate representation of that person's communication skills in English. I have never taken a student without having spoken to them. Never.
Right.
GRE is an interesting issue. There was a time when, for let's say political reasons, departments began eliminating the GRE as a required part of the application. The reason being that that low socioeconomic status students from lowest quintile high schools, in terms of median household income, students of minority backgrounds, Black and Hispanic students, Southeast Asian American students, tended not to do as well on the GRE. And so they said, well, because these, there's going to be a detrimental effect on the application, so we can't use the GRE anymore. I think pretty soon after that started, and some of the other arguments were the GRE score doesn't predict the ability of a student to complete a PhD, and that may be entirely true. It probably is. I think that there have been credible studies on that. However, once you eliminate the GRE, especially for international students, or especially students from rural America who went to schools that, there are thousands of four-year colleges and universities in America. And if a faculty search committee has not heard of a school, and they don't know the great inflation culture there, they don't know anything about the rigor of the school, if you don't have that extra data point, it makes it very difficult to standardize and normalize your interpretation of the quality of an application. And is it true that low students from low socioeconomic backgrounds don't do as well in the GRE. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But what you have to do is compare those scores to other scores within the same school. Now, suppose someone gets suppose someone gets an 80th percentile on the math or a 60th percentile on the math, and they went to a school on the border of Kansas and Colorado, in the middle of nowhere, exact center of the country, right? Not to cast aspersion at all on different regions of the country, but I'm just saying that, okay, the median income maybe is not going to be as high. They got a 60th percentile on the math section of the GRE, but in their school, that's the 99th percentile. That looks pretty good. That looks like a pretty good utilization of the resources that person had. And yeah, that's a really good GRE score, given the preparation that student had. Now, yeah, it's an absolute. There may be some sense that a 60th percentile is not as good as a 90th percentile if you went to Harvard or MIT. But there's an extra kind of bit of care, or there's an extra bit of character to which being the 99th percentile at the place that you went into acquiring the resources in order to do well on this standardized test by the standards of the people around you. I also feel like, we started this conversation talking about the different aspects, the half dozen or so documents that need to go into a grad school application, and the GRE score is only one. So by saying that, someone doesn't do as well in the GRE, then that one piece of data is basically going to turn the admissions committee members, who can see all of the other aspects of the application, that's going to turn them into one issue deciders, right? The GRE is not so good. That person's out. I did really poorly on the math section of my GRE. Like, we're talking 50th percentile. I don't do well on standardized tests. I don't, whatever. But and I'm a white guy. I went to a private university. I happen to be from a low income background, but I had a lot of financial aid and a really generous scholarship from Boston University. And I got the 50th percentile on the math section of the GRE. And I got into Caltech, Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, Berkeley. And so clearly they were looking at other aspects of my application. I did well on the chemistry and the verbal and the analytical sections of the GRE. So, it's a diversification, strategy. So I don't know. I think the GRE probably does more good than harm overall, and I'm glad that it's coming back.
So if you have a relatively low GRE, you can still apply. There's no harm.
Yes.
Going
absolutely.
to the top schools. Yeah. One last thing that I think it's still, as far as I understand, requested at some schools is the diversity statement. It's relatively abundant still. Can you explain to those who don't know what it is about, especially to international students, what really the best diversity statement looks like?
I have never been to nor applied to a school that used, or a department or program that used a diversity statement. So even at UC San Diego, School of Engineering, where I was associate dean for students, we didn't require this. And so I can tell you in general terms what that might be about. But honestly, I would be shocked if in the Trump era it was being requested this fall for graduate schools. I've written one as a faculty candidate.
Well, for faculty candidates, that's for sure. I had to write the same, and that's a different story.
Yeah,
Slightly,
and
I
those
can
are
say.
being
Yeah,
eliminated now.
yeah.
Um, it's just because it's so easy to fake it. I mean, I think most caring individuals value a diversity of opinion. They value a diversity that, they want their labs and programs to kind of look like the environments that they're taking up space at, right? They want a place that's representative. They are interested in giving people opportunity. Everyone likes the underdog story. It's a very, I think, deep part of our psychology. You want
American Dream.
right. You want to support the American dream. Yeah, you want to support that inner city kid who didn't have a lot of opportunity. And, all things being equal, or even things 49-51, you want to give the edge to the person who didn't have a lot. And then, yeah. I mean, who that's true for white kids from Appalachia, or, white Sicilian American immigrants from a poor family, right? I think yeah, you don't want to just perpetuate, the rich getting richer, the New York Yankees always buying up the best pitchers and home run hitters, right? You want to lift all boats. I think most people kind of have a view that's right, and that's true across races and across socioeconomic statuses as well. So I don't in principle see anything wrong with the idea of supporting inclusive environments. I do see a problem with doing it in a overly uh, forced way, in a way that invites a lot of disingenuousness. Because diversity statement, all you have to do is, I mean, talk about something that could be written by ChatGPT, right? There are words that you use that people who are interested in these things they'll just check off a checklist, and yeah, you said intersectional identity and you did whatever, and okay, that's a good diversity statement. I think if it evolves to the point where it's a, like a service statement, like a public service statement, then then that's better, because you can include different groups. You could say, I want to create a program for military veterans. I want to create a program for former families of former coal miners, because there aren't as many jobs in mining industries. You want to create programs uh, for for rural Americans. I think there's a certain section of, 2017 to 2022 era liberal society that would have bristled at that, but I think that would be great. Do it all. Do it all. Help everyone.
So there are a lot of things that students can do in advance, and I know students are not always sure if they can do it or if they can rely on the information they get. So the number of questions that I have is, can you, or is there any need to reach out to the faculty in advance before you apply and express your interest, maybe send your research proposal, maybe say, okay, here I am. Some students think that if you do not receive any reply, it means you shouldn't apply there, which is obviously wrong. But what's your take on this reaching out sort of phase that some students go with, especially for international students is the case? Because in Europe, this is pretty common. So I think a lot of people just duplicate that into the US system, which doesn't work well.
The vast majority of outreach emails that I get from prospective students are crap, and I I I say that in such a harsh term, I use such a harsh term because I want those students to be able to do better and to have a better shot at getting what they want. There, we'll start just with the superficial level. The font is different between my name and the body of the email, which means that it was generated by some automated email process that just spit out 100 emails with different professors' names. Then you look in the body of the email, and it's about CO2 reduction reactions on chalcogenide surfaces or something that I don't do at all, and there is no connection whatsoever between that person's past interest. It's fine. If someone with that research background applies to my lab, that's fine. But there needs to be a reason why they're interested in the work that I do, because I'm not going to support that because I don't have the grant funding nor the expertise or the qualifications to direct a thesis in that area.
Let's suppose the student applies with a proposal or with a letter that is specifically tailored to your lab. Would you say that would help the student, or that's not a good idea because some departments, they prohibit this sort of interaction before the admission is finished?
So no departments are going to prohibit this interaction. I mean, if a PI reports you to there might be students should not reach out ahead of time. Maybe you should think about not applying there if they have such a statement on their website. But if a PI is going to report you, say that there is, and the PI gets an email from, now we get, during this season, we get maybe 3 to 6 of these emails a day from international students, especially in the fall. And I am not going to report those people if they violated some rule, some injunction against submitting a letter of an email of interest to the faculty member ahead of time. If I did, you wouldn't want to work for me. I think that's an immense amount of spite being shown by someone in a position of immense privilege to be shutting down the future of somebody in that of a younger person in that kind of way. That would be intolerable to me. I also wouldn't advise someone to submit a research proposal that was exactly what that was in the vein of what I was doing, because you're not going to do that 100 times for 100 different people. What I would do is, in the body of the email, be specific about why your work is interesting or why that person's work is interesting to you, how you feel you might be able to contribute to it, or why you're curious about being able to contribute to it. You probably don't know how you're going to contribute to it. Maybe it involves solid state NMR and you've never done solid state NMR. So obviously you're not going to be able to contribute right off the bat, but you could say, I'm really fascinated by this type of material and the characterization techniques, and in particular, your approach to it, because I have enjoyed, talks you've given on YouTube or papers that I've read. So you can make the connection in the body of the email without saying, this is what I want to do. I think that would come off as two things. One is presumptuous, and number two is, I think it might come off as why are you spending so much time on one prospective advisor?
And still, if you find someone who's responsive and who seems to be supportive of your application, is that okay to include the name in your PhD application for the department?
100%. Yeah. If a student reaches out to me, and so I should say that of these, multiple emails that I get per day, I used to get more when I was at UC San Diego because everyone wants to be in San Diego because it's the best weather in North America. And when I was there and I would get, sometimes 10 emails like this, I would reply to all of them if there was anything in it that made it look not like boilerplate. If it's a boilerplate email that they just mass sent out, then I'm not going to reply to it. But if there's anything at all in there, then I will reply to it. It may not be an invitation to have a Zoom meeting, but it will be, a reply that one good person would write to another. One person of privilege would write to a younger person who is not so privileged because they don't have all the things that I have, but maybe want some encouragement or advice. And I do reply to all those people. If a student reaches out and we do talk on Zoom, and I say, my response is pretty much always is always very similar. If it looks like there is a fit, I will tell them that I don't know what my funding situation precisely is going to look like this time next year, because usually you're reaching out in the fall and the new graduate students don't start until the fall. And usually I have some grant proposals that are in the works or that have been submitted, or maybe the money's not in yet. And I don't know if I'll have this slot available. And so I have to be straight with them and tell them what the probability is. And then I say, I would strongly encourage you to examine all of your options and to reach out to other people on my campus, ideally, but also elsewhere. Consider all of your options and just know that this is the rough probability that you could end up with a spot in my lab. And clearly it's worked out for some people.
What would you say the general strategy should be for applying to grad schools in terms of how many schools should the student apply to and what kind of rankings should be chosen, and what should be considered when a student is thinking of, applying to, say, MIT, Stanford, Harvard, or maybe going to University of Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder, UCSD, or some other places. So there are different ranks, right? There are different scopes even sometimes. Of course, there are different advisors too. So what should go into the equation for this decision-making process?
The ideal Pollyanna response is to say, you look for the place where you're going to have the best experience. And that may be Ohio State University. It's probably not going to be Harvard, honestly. There are, if you value one-on-one advice from your advisor, it's probably not going to be a top 5 school. Usually you have to get through layers of office staff people to even get an appointment with your advisor. I talked to my advisor when I was in graduate school about science about once a year on average. Most of the mentoring that I got from him was in the form of handwritten comments on drafts of papers. So I think you go to a top 5 school for a different reason. You go because there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of money. You generally don't have to worry about having a TA every semester in order to make ends meet or to keep your research position in the lab. It's also really nice to have a high-ranked school on your CV, right? No one's going to ever deny that. The problem is the problem is I don't even know if it's a problem because I would have made exactly the same decision. There's a quote I love from the English writer Aldous Huxley, who said something like, the end result of any intellectual journey is a return to the obvious from which the non-intellectual has never stirred. So I'm going to go on this whole garden path and just end up with go to the best school that you can get into. But the the fact is, once you get into a high ranked school, there is a 90% chance that you're going to go there, as opposed to a middle of the road or even a very good school that's maybe outside of the top 20. You're going to go to that top 10 school most of the time. Yes, I've had situations where there have been students who have turned down offers from higher ranked schools to join me at the time at UC San Diego, which is still a pretty high ranked school. But, maybe I convinced them to come to UCSD instead of Berkeley. Something like that, right? It doesn't happen very often, and now I've kind of, in my grizzled old age, I've come to the view that probably I shouldn't even be going after these students who have an offer from Stanford, because the pull is just too great to have the S bomb or the H bomb on the CV. If I were an older student who, say, had some life experience, who still had a high GPA, who had the opportunity to go to a top 10 school, and I'm using top 10 I just mean the standard US News and World Report rankings, right? The Harvard, MIT, Caltech, Berkeley, Stanford, Columbia, Hopkins, so on. If I might have had the opportunity to go to one of those schools, but maybe there was someone who gave really good talks on YouTube, or who had really eye-catching research, or who was known to be a really good advisor, and I didn't have that need to be in one of those high-stress environments where you rarely see your advisor, there are a lot of resources, but the lab has 40 people in it. I would nowadays I would pick the other place. I would pick the place that I was going to have the better experience. And I'm not even going to be belittling and say that that outlook comes with maturity, because I understand it, right? Like, yeah, you have the opportunity to go to MIT. That's where you're going to go. I wish there were an easier response.
But would you say that the advisor and the mentorship that you can receive from that advisor is more important than the actual ranking of the school?
100% that's true. And there are some advisors, particularly in STEM fields, where that person is kind of an island and is a name brand in and of themselves. A good example in my field of materials science, materials chemistry, is John Rogers when he was at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which is still a top 10 engineering school, but it's not, by US News and World Report, but it's not MIT, right? It's not Northwestern, where he eventually moved to. Maybe in some areas it is. But if you had a degree from the Rogers lab, or you did a postdoc in the Rogers lab, that means way more than the program does and the ranking of the place. I like to think that, one of my dreams as an assistant professor, 13 years ago, was that I wanted to be that kind of destination lab. I wanted students to come in and have such a good experience and publish a lot of papers and get the job that they wanted. And so my lab would be viewed with a level of cachet that is maybe a bit above the cachet of the place in which I worked. And I don't know, people can judge whether or not that was true if they happen to be in my field. And maybe there was some cachet premium. I like to think that there was.
Do you think it matters whether a student has a master's degree or not? Somebody applies from, say, Europe or from outside the US. Many students apply with a master's degree. And now inside the US, most students apply with a bachelor degree to a PhD program. So how are these students assessed within the same pool?
I think an international student with a master's degree definitely has a leg up on the international student, everything else being equal without a master's degree. I think it just means an extra year of maturity, an extra year of coursework and background. Maybe they did a thesis. There was time for papers from their undergraduate time to get out and get published. With domestic students, there are so few individuals who pursue a master's degree with the intent of doing a PhD later, because if they do that in the US, they're probably going to have to repeat a lot of coursework. They're going to be an extra year in debt, and it's not something you see super often. Most domestic students get into PhD programs directly from their bachelor's degree. In those cases, do I give a leg up to the master's degree student holder? Probably yes, but I think it depends on why they did the master's. A lot of times those students have done other things. They've worked for a little bit. Those students always have an advantage in my eyes. Maybe, it's not a master's degree, but I've had students who were in the military for 5 years. I give a huge advantage to those students because they're like more grown up and they know about time management and discipline. And many of them, if they're interested in STEM, also had technical jobs within the military, which is a big advantage. They're generally not afraid to take stuff apart and build, new things. There's kind of a fearlessness with those students. So yeah, if among domestic students, less of an advantage. Among international students, a decided advantage.
A lot of students try to get engaged into research early on to try to make a compelling case for a PhD or just get a research experience. So do committees prioritize those who have that past research experience? And in that case, a master's degree, which say in Europe at least, it always is connected to a lot of research that you do, a certain thesis that you write, that should give us an advantage, right? But so is it the case? Does it give you any advantage? And to what degree should you get involved with research, as a bachelor student, for example?
If you want to do a PhD and you've never done research, that's a problem. Not from the standpoint of the admissions committee and how they're going to view your application, but from a personal standpoint. How do you even know if you like research? How do you know that you want to make very little money for 5 or 6 years if you've never spent a lot of time and late nights in a lab and weekends in a lab? I would not advise a student who has never done research to apply for a research PhD program. How do you get research if you're from one of those thousands of colleges and universities that doesn't have many labs? Well, you apply to REU programs. You do whatever kind of independent projects that your faculty has access to, maybe even using equipment in a teaching lab. You really have to try to get it if you want to test out the hypothesis that I'm a person who's interested in research. The vast majority of master's degrees in engineering, at least in the US are coursework based masters and don't have a heavy research component. Internationally, um, I'm I will take your word for it that in Europe, a master's degree typically comes with a research thesis, and thus that does increase your credibility as a researcher in an application to the US because you have that additional year of research.
What about publications? So if a student has 5 papers, another student has 1 paper. I'm not saying where exactly they're published. I'm not saying what's inside, just the numbers. What does it mean to a committee? How does a committee look at those publications? Because obviously there are a lot of students who have no papers whatsoever, but they're excellent. They could be absolutely amazing PhD students.
It is very difficult to get into a top 50 PhD program in the sciences and engineering without a paper as an undergraduate. Um, if you don't have a paper, you have to have some other documented research experience. That could be a poster at a conference. At the very least, it has to be a poster at an internal conference, like an undergraduate research symposium. It could be an archive paper. If you're in some fields like computer science, it could be something that you did that is available online. Maybe it's an online course or something that you made on YouTube. Maybe it's something like a simulation that you could find or that you could link to. But there has to be some documented portfolio. It would be like applying to a master's degree on flute performance without having any recitals. Like, I mean, there has to be something. So if you're talking, I'll answer the question specifically about 5 papers versus 1 paper. It doesn't matter where, I mean, it matters a little bit where it's published, but I think the leadership that is shown by the researcher on the paper is more important than the number. If it's a bunch of papers that you published, we I had a graduate student who was an undergraduate in a lab that published 50 papers a year. And there was a technique that this student became an expert in that every graduate student and postdoc needed this kid to do the work. And so he did this measurement or whatever, and he got like 8 papers from his undergraduate research. But he only did one thing on those papers. But if he had a first author paper where he was kind of the puppeteer and was able to speak with some authority on the conception of the work, the significance of the work, the hypothesis that was being tested, and so on, that to me is much more valuable than just turning the crank on one item.
But there could be also red flags too, right? So do you think that, for example, there are many students that we see who apply to our PhD programs who publish reviews, who have a lot of papers which are really difficult to assess in terms of the science quality positively. There's a lot of it going now. And what would you say that does it really help?
Papers. Oh, okay. So there is the publication industry is always, there are always new scientific journals. There are many publishing houses that just publish as many papers as possible to flood the zone, right?
Exactly. So when students take advantage of that, is that
people, I don't know
no.
if they are taking advantage of it. I mean, are you, as a reviewer of these applications, are you treating a paper published by MDPI in the same vein as you're treating a paper that was published by the Royal Society of Chemistry or the American Physical Society? I doubt it.
I do my best to do it, but it really depends on what is inside, right? So if I see that the abstract says whatever you mixed graphene with another crap and then you got XYZ out, the best catalyst ever, that's not the type of research that we're looking for. But if it's something about, like, say, the spectroscopy of certain surfaces, and yes, it's published in Catalysis and MDPI for whatever reason, because many students have no control over where it's published, right? It comes from their advisors anyway. So that might be fine still. So
well, you have to look at the paper, right? Is there...
Yeah. Of course, you have to read it.
Is the scientific method actually being followed in the paper?
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that a paper in a publishing house that publishes 1,000 journals just so that they can drive up clicks, right? A lot of publishing houses are doing that. And, predatory and coercive citation and especially bad peer review practices, there can still be good work published in those places. Like, you don't want to knock the... You don't want to be prejudiced against the work because of where it appears.
Absolutely.
But the probability that the random paper in Sensors and Actuators, I'll even pick a one from a reputable source, like the random paper that ends up in Sensors and Actuators B could have been a paper in Nature Nanotechnology. Not likely, right? And so but if there are reasons to look at that application, like they had 10 papers in some predatory journal. If there are things that are green flags to look at in those applications, and you're really considering that person, then click on the links and see if the scientific method is being followed, if there is evidence of creativity in that work, and you balance it against the rest of the application package. And so a lot of what we are doing, because we can't take a year to review all applications, because we could read every word in every application. We could read every word of every paper on the person's CV, but it would take forever. That's all we would ever do. One time I went to the dermatologist because I had like a mole on my torso. And he said, if we removed moles like that from every person who came in here, that's all this hospital complex would ever do. So that's why we ask for a diverse range of application materials. But yeah, I mean, you introduced the topic, like, there are journals that are just paper mills. There are labs that are paper mills that publish 200 papers a year. What are the odds that there's much quality control happening there? And what are the odds that it's just that those labs are just that work is being siphoned off because of internal incentive structures at that person's institution to produce all of this stuff? What are the odds that it's good? I don't know. Maybe the odds are high, but but probably not.
Usually, yes. Usually it's not very high. How would you say that?
I'm sorry, Andrew. Can I interrupt one more time? This goes because I don't want to be so elite, right? I don't want to come off as so elite to say that all science in predatory journals is bad, because it's definitely not. You got to publish somewhere. I would say that papers coming out of huge labs at top 5 schools, the quality control on those papers is often lacking. Reason being, when a paper comes out of a lab like mine, I'll just speak to my own experience. The PI, the person with the most experience in writing, in evaluating hypotheses, in experimental design and data analysis, spends a lot of time on those papers, even with the best students. And it is not uncommon for me, for example, in our most recent paper in science robotics. I spent many weekends in a row, many evenings with a fine-tooth comb going through every single piece of those data. When I was in huge labs at Harvard and Stanford, the PI definitely did not do that. And if you're publishing a paper every 10 days, you can't do that. If you have a laboratory budget of $5 million that you need to maintain with grant funding, it is impossible. And so it goes the other way too. Some of those papers get into really high, glamour journals because there's a good infrastructure in the lab for making figures that are like professional quality. The students, tend to be good, but they're still quite inexperienced. And also people click the papers that came from famous labs at top 5 schools.
Sure. Well, I can add a lot of things here, but maybe we can move on in the interest of time. How important is your GPA? So I can speak for myself. When from my bachelor, I didn't have a very good GPA. There are many reasons for this. Primarily because I went to the chemistry school, being a physicist by training from my high school. It was a mistake, perhaps. I wouldn't say it probably was, because I had to learn chemistry, but it was a very hard time for me. And so my GPA was not perfect. And I don't myself, just seeing still a lot of students around who don't have very good GPA, but are excellent in the lab. They're excellent learners. I'm more inclined myself to think that GPA is not logically a good indicator of how good the student will be. But again, it's just my experience. What do you think about it? How important is that GPA? So say if a student has a GPA of 3.8 and the school says, well, an average for us is 4.2. Does it mean that the student should not even try to apply?
4.2, that's a lot of A pluses. I think GPA is correlated to research success, but are you going to have populations of individuals who had a lower GPA that are excellent in the lab? You absolutely will. The two things that GPA has going for it are, one is time management, because all things being equal, the GPA is an indicator of how focused you can be while you're studying, how you free yourself of distraction, how disciplined you are in preparing for exams. The other thing that it does is provides a certification for coursework that is important. So this is more transcript than grade point average. But if I need someone to do materials kinetics, and someone got an A versus a C in materials kinetics, then I'm going to give the edge to the person who got the A. So sometimes you need to, everything else being equal, and sometimes you just need that external certification of actual intellectual skills. I've had students who have been horrible researchers who've had 4.0s, which in America is pretty much the highest you can get, because A+ at most schools doesn't give you any extra. And I've had not many, but a couple of students with like a B+ average who have done well. Do I think that there is a valuable cross-section or intersection of people who had a decently high GPA and, research skills that were I would say that the median successful GPA has been somewhere in the 3.7 to 3.85 range in my lab. There's also grade inflation at a lot of schools. So when I left UCSD, like 86% of graduates in engineering had above a 3.0. And so it means less than it used to. But I think it is valuable if you're going to compare between students with similar backgrounds. It is useful, but yeah, you're not going to use it as the one-dimensional indicator.
So if you have a low GPA, should you still apply to a big school?
It depends on how low we're talking. There are some schools that are going to use a 3.0 or 3.3 or 3.5 cutoff to even be considered for the PhD program, and that's just a means of time management. If they put that in their, I mean, time management on the part of the committee. If they put such a lower limit, most of them won't. It's very un-DEI of an American college to put a GPA cutoff or GPA floor on their website. But if they do, yeah, it's probably a waste of time to submit an application, but most of them won't, and you should submit anyway. You can explain, that's another good thing about the statement of purpose is you can explain a low GPA. Suppose, yeah, you had a background in physics, and then you switched to chemistry, and you had to learn everything from the ground up. I have a former PhD student who makes way more money than I do, who had to explain 5 felony convictions on his graduate school application. So yeah, apply. You should always apply.
Are online interviews still happening? So once you submit your application, should you expect to be interviewed online before you're invited to campus?
There are 2 types of online interviews. One is kind of done outside of the application system by the PIs who you may have listed on your application or to whom you have reached out before you applied. And so those interactions can be conveyed to the admissions committee as either a positive or a negative. Most departments, at least in engineering in America, do not do a mandatory online interview. Mm-hmm. Other programs like medical school programs, they're much more common to do them.
And when a student comes on campus, is it still an interview? So should the student be prepared to be behaving like an interview?
Some places, yes. Some places, no. But if you are going to a place where you've already gotten an offer letter and you're going to visit the campus and you're talking to the PI that you want to work with, it is definitely an interview. The PI can make the decision there that there's no way things are going to work out with this person. They stood up on my desk. They jumped around. One time I had a student just come in with a sour expression and like complain about the lighting in my office. And I told that person afterwards that there was no way it was going to work out. It was more than just that. They were like mean.
Okay, so students should be prepared.
There are other aspects of graduate applications that are idiosyncratic to not just the school, but the program within the school. Some of them are direct to PI admissions, where the committee really is only figuring out who gets fellowships and things like that. And the PI who has reviewed applications on the basis of which PIs the student has put as a faculty member of interest. And so maybe I'll get 50 applications where a student has listed me as someone they might want to work with. And I go through that list and I have some Zoom conversations with a few of them. And then I tell the admissions committee, admit this person, and then they just do it. There are some places that follow the cohort model where they admit a cohort of, say, 20 students and they expect a yield of 12 students, and maybe there are 12 faculty members who on average will take one student each. And that is probably a bit more common, but even in the cohort admission process, the individual faculty members who want to work with a particular student are probably going to get to have that student admitted. So if I'm talking to a student, I've had multiple Zoom conversations, things are going really well, there's a really good fit, I will send the admissions committee a note saying, I think we should really look at this student closely. I would definitely be able to provide the funding if this person were to be admitted. And that level of commitment displayed on the part of the PI goes a long way in the admissions committee. It would be really hard for the admissions committee to turn down that applicant after getting an endorsement from a faculty member who's willing to commit resources to bring them on.
When it comes to international applicants, what are the typical issues that you notice with the applications from overseas? What should those applicants keep in mind? Maybe there are some basic things they don't quite grasp about the system or about the process that lead to failure, but could be an easy fix.
Now that we have ChatGPT, I would recommend, if you've written your statement of purpose, your personal statement, whatever they're going to call it, run it through for a list, not to rewrite, not to even revise or do any in-text things, but just to give you some comments. Read this with the eyes of a professor at an American university. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying what the perception is. If an email comes to me or comes to, let's say, the median person doing admissions, and there's a lot of flowery language buttering that person up, or esteemed admissions committee, I love you so much, and all this fluffy stuff, it just doesn't look good. That's not the type of language that we are used to seeing in this context, and it is useful to get that kind of feedback for free from an LLM before you send it in. There are instances where if you have the option to take the GRE, I would take it, because I think international students are at a big disadvantage when they don't have the GRE, because you get a transcript that's like a scanned copy of something. It is written in another language. You have no idea what the scores mean on the transcript. And so in the statement of purpose, you probably want to do a little research on what a transcript in Europe and North America look like. And so you can comment on this is equivalent to something that you're used to seeing. So if you can help the admissions committee put it into context, and yeah, is that a tax on an international applicant? It absolutely is. Is it unfair that they have to do that? It absolutely is. But they should do it anyway because it's going to increase their chance of success. And it's very hard to change behavior of the tens of thousands of faculty members who are doing admissions in graduate programs in the US.
Do you see an increase in the number of international applications in the recent years?
We are seeing a huge decrease in numbers from China and India, and less so from India. There was an uptick from applicants from India, which is still kind of holding steady-ish. At least it's not nosediving as much as applicants from China. We're seeing a huge uptick in applicants from Central Asia and the Middle East and Africa. Applicants from Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda are all increasing. Applicants from South Korea, Japan, there aren't a ton. Applicants from Europe, a few, not a ton.
Now maybe we can do a very quick round of true or false kind of questions. I'm curious. You can also make comments on them. So maybe a couple of minutes per question. So true or false? Waiting for a confirmation that you can apply after you cold email the professor. So if you don't get that confirmation, should you apply or not?
False. You should still apply, but you should manage your expectations. If you don't get a reply from a professor, the odds are less of getting into that place than if you were to receive a reply in general. And I always do this to you. I'm sorry. There is a corollary. Not because of not because of particular rules that the department has as to the timing of the interaction between faculty and applicants, but because there are only a finite number of slots, and the chances are that a faculty member is going to take a person with whom they have had conversations, and that slot will be taken by that person.
GPT for improving your English. Yes or no?
Yes. For all the reasons we've discussed, it is great at critiquing a piece of work that you've already done. It's not very good at creating work whole cloth. Unless you provide it lots and lots of information and you make sure to click like deep research on
so it's not the English grammar and the language itself that is important to the committee. It's more the substance, the content of everything you write.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's very important to make sure that students understand. Correct. Now, GPT for tailoring your application to a particular faculty.
I think if you that's interesting. I'm going to say true. If you use an LLM for brainstorming, a way that you can tailor your past history into an argument for becoming a member of somebody's lab, and you can ask the LLM to read your statement of purpose with the eyes of that person, and again, click on deep research, and it will give you some great ideas as to how your past work can dovetail into work that person has published. And then you have to use your own brain to go through and make sure that that one, it makes sense, and two, to make it your own, because most stuff that it generates whole cloth is crap when viewed by someone who knows what they're talking about.
Okay, so GPT Deep Search for drafting ideas in the specific field and tailoring them to your CV.
I don't think it should write that section for you, but I think you can give it a draft and have it critique your draft through the lens of stuff that you've done and what that particular person is working on. And you can search for that work with one ChatGPT Deep Research search, or you can do it with 25 Google searches. The choice is yours, right? You just have to make sure that the papers that it brings up are real, right? Because there are still some issues there.
Yeah, I mean, the recent GPT, from what I played with, I can see that it can pretty nicely summarize professors' background, recent work, and And most importantly, it can summarize it in terms that the student can understand. So it's not a very deep paper that scientifically complex that the student has to disentangle for hours and hours. So I think a GPT can be very helpful just to get acquainted with the background and get yourself prepared for like who you're tailoring your application for.
Absolutely.
Sort of. No publications means zero chance of getting accepted.
False. You can have no publications and still get accepted to an excellent school. If you have not done research, then you have essentially no chance of getting into a top school. I don't think you would want to go to grad school for a PhD in a research discipline if you didn't have research experience. How do we know that you had research experience? The number one way is publications, but also posters and outputs like archive papers, bioarchive papers, chemchive papers, undergraduate research symposia, and so on. It can also come through the letters of recommendation. There might be a publication that's in press, and maybe there's an opportunity to drop that in, or a senior thesis, or a coursework assignment where you got to write about your research experience, something like that.
An invitation to visit the campus means that you have a PhD offer.
False, for two reasons. One, there are some cultures within STEM graduate education where it's always an interview. It's almost always an interview. Medical school programs, interviews are quite common. Engineering, not so much. However, in the case where you have an acceptance letter, and you will know ahead of time whether or not you've been admitted to the program. Before it will say in the letter, you have an admission offer. It comes with financial support. We'd love to invite you to visit campus. If it's an interview, it would be explicit in the letter. But even in the case where you already have the offer in hand and they will take you, unless there's some financial crisis like there was this past spring with many places due to the Trump administration's policies, you can go full well knowing that you're going to have a PhD position, but you won't know that you're going to find a lab that will take you. And if you are not prepared for that visit and you don't demonstrate your creativity and reliability, these keywords, you're still not going to have a position in the lab that you want. And you're putting your ability to continue for all 5 years at risk.
The more offers you get, the better. True or false?
If you're going to force me to the binary choice, I would definitely say true. The more options you have, the better, within reason. 5 offers is better than 1 offer. When I was a faculty candidate, I only had 1 offer. It was from UCSD, so it worked out well for me. But 5 offers and 20 offers, I think you'd rather have 5 offers and limit your choice architecture a little bit. Also, you're not going to visit all of those places. So in a way, there's some equanimity that comes with having fewer choices to make.
Do different universities have different confirmation deadlines for the time by which you have to confirm that you accept the offer? So does it also restrict like what is your strategy should be?
Decision day in America is April 15th. That's pretty much the day that
everywhere the same.
Everywhere is the same.
Do not apply to top schools unless your CV is extraordinary. True or false?
False. You can make up for a CV that is mid by having excellent letters, good research experience. Maybe you've done service. Maybe you did Teach for America or something that is maybe one line in your CV, but took a lot of effort.
You should only apply to the labs of well-known professors who
False.
publish a lot, who have a lot of things happening. Yeah. False, and why? Like for a lot of students, that doesn't make sense, right? Because they haven't been in academia, so they don't know all these things that may develop later. So how would you explain to them like why they should be careful selecting a well-known professor?
If you want mentorship from a well-known professor, you are out of luck. There are very few well-known professors who spend a lot of time with their students compared to good, solid professors at places that are not in the top 5. And there will be exceptions. People will say, well, this person at Caltech was a wonderful advisor and so on. But there's a big survivor bias in answers like that. Chances are you came in with a pretty good idea of how to mentor yourself and how to look things up in the library and how to seek advice from other people.
Right. So basically, it's a function of whether you want to have independence or you want that guidance and a lot of guidance. Some students need a lot of guidance. Some students want to be or are ready to be independent, and they can learn this way even faster in some cases.
One strategy is to work at a, not top 20 school, but maybe a top 50 school, top 100 school. Find a really an excellent mentor, a lab that is doing interesting research, and then do your postdoc at Illinois or Michigan or Harvard. Because when you're applying for a job, the most important thing is the last place you went, not the place that you spent the most time.
Well, when I was applying for faculty positions across the US, my experience was that in many cases, committees looked at where you got your PhD from. So I did my postdoc at Stanford. It's one of the best labs, but my PhD was not from the top 10 schools. So obviously being competitive for, say, top 15, top 20 schools across the US was pretty much impossible. So would you say this is still holds true today?
I think it depends on who's on the faculty search committee. I think if someone went to Ohio State for their PhD and they did their postdoc at Caltech, that person is going to get the same consideration from me as somebody who did their PhD at Harvard and their postdoc at Caltech. I would say that was true at UCSD in the faculty hiring that we did.
There's one last question that I want to ask you, and that concerns people who failed their PhD application rounds. So there are many students who applied everywhere or applied wherever they could pay for, and they could not get any offers. So what would be your advice for them? For example, should they continue next year? Do they have a better shot at it? Or maybe they should reevaluate what really matters to them? Do they really need that PhD? What's your take on this?
I would work in the field for a year, either in it could be in an academic lab, but not a degree granting track. It could be at a company, could be at a startup or established company. It could be in government and policy at the state or federal level or even municipal level. Work for a year, try to learn a little bit more about how your interests fit into the wider world. That's good from the standpoint of your own professional development and also to give you time. Maybe there are papers a paper that you had from your undergraduate work that's not out yet, And when that comes out, it will increase the chances of getting an acceptance. It also might change your career trajectory. You may decide that you want to do the thing that you did for that 1 year professionally. And maybe you want to, instead of doing a PhD in chemistry, you want to do an MS in public policy or public health, or you want to do a law degree or a business degree or something. If you really are sure that you want to do a PhD and you want to try extra hard, the best way to get access to a PhD program is through the master's program. So if you apply as a master's student, or maybe if you get rejected, you can say, hey, you have a master's degree program. I'll be a paying customer for that. I'll apply for TA-ships, but my acceptance is not going to be, my attendance is not going to be dependent on that. We would take you. Either Rochester or UCSD would have taken that person in an instant if they wanted to pay for a master's. And then if they do a good job in a research lab, then that position can be upgraded from MS to PhD. Now, it did cost you some time, it did cost you some money, but your graduate coursework is being done at the place that you ultimately want to matriculate as a PhD student, so you won't have to retake it. It shows an immense amount of fortitude and commitment that you're willing to take out a loan to do the MS program. And the admissions to anywhere except like a top 5 school maybe for the master's program are well over 50%, because master's programs make a lot of money, and it's we compete hard for master's students.
I know a number of students who had industry experience, extensive industry experience. So they came back for a PhD. So would that be also a plausible route to getting into the program?
Yeah, I would say that that's sort of track 1 of the 2 track. It's not a 1 year in industry, but it could be 10 years. And then I think those are the types of people who tend to do really well in PhD programs. They have the shortest route to PhD because their prefrontal cortices are more well-formed. They're better at making more difficult decisions. They have an idea of what they want to do with their degree. And so those students, to me, have a great advantage. In fact, it took 10 years in my lab for me to be the oldest member of my lab. I always had older students. My first graduate student, Adam Prince, who's now a professor of chemical and environmental engineering at University of Arizona, he was a year older than me. Alex Zaretsky, who founded a company doing graphene synthesis and application to various electronic and proteomic sensor chips. He was 2 years older than me. I hired a graduate student, Mickey Finn, who was like 8 years older than me. He spent time being a sound technician for kind of B-list traveling rock and metal bands. And so he joined, very fearless about working with equipment. And so I've had veterans of the military in my band, talking about B-list bands, I'm getting ahead of myself. In many ways, my lab has been a lot like a band. Who was a veteran of the Navy. That was Daniel Rodriguez, and he's doing very well for himself in industry now.
So there could be a lot of career trajectories that could be very beneficiary in some way, but my view is that many students, from what I receive a lot of these messages from students who say, I've been trying to get into a PhD for 3, 4, 5 years, every single year trying really hard, and I couldn't. And what I normally say is that the PhD is if you're over focusing on that, then you're losing on other parts of your career. And so maybe moving out, trying to find a way around, and then trying yourself out in some other roles, and then coming back in some way could work better than trying to really narrowly focus on getting that admission for years and years.
I think it depends on what your other options are. If you are earning $100,000 a year in industry with a bachelor's or a master's degree, I think you're doing really well. It would be a very tough sell to earn $35,000 for 5 years as a PhD student if you're already, earning that cash. Why don't you, live kind of below your means and invest it and do some other exciting things, right? There's a huge opportunity cost to doing a PhD, and I certainly wouldn't encourage everyone to do it. I think in many cases we're overtraining people, certainly in some fields like physics and basic biology. They're underpaid in industry. There aren't that many jobs. A lot of those individuals have to work in other fields and or do an MBA in order to become to rebrand themselves. And so I think we're doing a lot of people a disservice by encouraging every student with research experience or who's shown some facility in the lab to do a PhD. Not that we're doing that with every student, but there is a trend.
Yes, sure. I fully agree. Some of the basic sciences are amazing for your brain development, but they're not so good for your career development in certain areas.
Yeah. The offshoots of scientific research funding are trained individuals. Of course, the society views it as, because they don't know how academia works, that it's results that could be useful for cancer therapies and alternative energy and new military and intelligence hardware and stuff, and that's all true. But where is the equity actually going? It's in human capital, and those individuals have to have something to do after. And if you're oversupplying the human capital, then the people who do get jobs are underpaid, and there are a lot of people who are not working in the field.
That's so true. Thank you, Darren. Thank you for coming for all this conversation, and I hope that this will be very helpful to all the master and bachelor students who will be listening.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for the invitation.